What is leading the decline in expectations, and then UMich inflation expectations rising? What's leading it?
Overall, consumers are feeling much more stressed out about inflation than they were just a few months ago. And this is largely being driven by increased concerns over not just gas prices, but food prices as well. I think consumers earlier in the previous few months felt like that the increase in gas prices was possibly temporary. And now that it's been going on for several months, consumers are getting increasingly worried about the future.
In terms of what the implications of this are, can you just kind of walk me through what you think is going to happen next? If the consumer's feeling this gloomy, what are the implications for the economy?
I think the implications are not good because actually when you look at all the things that are happening in this country and also overseas in terms of labor strikes, war in the Middle East, and the resumption of student loan payments. There are a lot of things that are going on right now that could weigh down consumer attitudes and their willingness to spend. So given that, it's actually kind of surprising that consumer sentiment only declined by 7% this month. So I think there's a decent amount of downside risk in the months ahead.
So what I find weird is that if I just take a look at the daily national average gasoline prices, according to AAA, they haven't moved. They've been going down. So I'm confused as to what that reaction is really to.
I think consumers might be a little bit confused as well. Well, not so much confused as they are unsure, because we saw the increases just a few months ago, July and August, and I think consumers didn't react too much to it back then. But I think part of the reason was they thought it was temporary, and I think now that consumers are just what we're seeing over the last 4 months are increased spontaneous mentions of food prices and gas prices. So this is something that's not really limited to one part of the country. We're seeing this across the board.
Interesting.
Joanne, to what extent are we also seeing the impact finally of higher rates?
I think that's certainly part of it, but given how much, how focused consumers are on the types of purchases that really affect their lives, I think it does make sense that food and gas are really on the forefront of people's minds. Consumers have noted the effect of higher interest rates on the purchases that they do need to do, for example, durables and autos, and so we're seeing consumers notice those higher interest rates, but in terms of active, conscious reactions to interest rates, that's probably not this month's increase, but certainly the pass-through to consumers, that's certainly part of it.
I wonder, Joanne, how are people feeling about what's happening in D.C., and is it hitting their radar yet in terms of the House not having a speaker and the dysfunction there?
We are hearing that mentioned by some consumers, but I think also the House dysfunction is a continuation of what we were seeing over the last few months with the close call with the federal government shutdown. So I think consumers are absolutely frustrated at the dysfunction in Washington, and they're reserving judgment about how that's going to look going forward. Certainly, if a federal shutdown does come to pass, what we've seen in previous shutdowns is that consumers absolutely do react to that, and sentiment is likely to decline even further if that happens.
Joanne, one final quick question. It won't be captured by this data, but we've just seen the start of another major global conflict. Historically, how do consumers react to news such as this? We've seen the war in Ukraine, but now we've got the emerging conflict that we see in Israel. How would you expect the consumer to react to that?
I think that consumers will absolutely, their attitudes will definitely deteriorate if this conflict continues to escalate, and especially if this provides even more disruptions to supply chains or gas or fuel prices. It will certainly affect consumers and their attitudes towards the economy.